Morena Koto, welcome to story time for today. It's a beautiful sunny day, which is fantastic. So hopefully sometime today you'll be able to get out and go for a walk, but it's great to see you all joining us today. So today we're going to be reading the story Baby Brains, and then we will be continuing on with James and the Giant Peach. Hey, great to see there's Kyron who's joined us. And there's Eden and Gwendolyn. Great to see you guys. I guess there's a bit of your morning tea routine, so I'm sure guys have got something yummy for morning tea. So hey, here's our first story, Baby Brains by Simon James. I'll just move over a little bit so you can all see. In the month before Baby Brains was born, Mrs. Brains was very busy. She read out loud every night to the baby inside her tummy. She played music and languages on headphones to her baby during the day. Mr. and Mrs. Brains wanted to make sure their baby was going to be very clever. They even turned up the television when the news came on. Mr. and Mrs. Brains were very excited when their baby was born. Our very own Baby Brains, said Mr. Brains proudly. When they brought him home from hospital, Mrs. Brains laid him down in the brand new cot. Sleep tight, Baby Brains, she whispered. The next morning, Mrs. Brains was on her way to get breakfast when she heard some strange noises in the living room. Mrs. Brains opened the door to see her baby sitting on the sofa reading the morning paper. By the afternoon, Baby Brains was helping mend the car. We've certainly got a bright one here, said Mr. Brains. That evening, Baby Brains spoke his first words. I'd like to go to school tomorrow, he said. The next day, he visited the local school. He sat down with the children and answered all the questions. The children were amazed. At the end of the afternoon, the teacher thanked Baby Brains. I don't think I've ever learned so much in one day, she said. On the way home, Baby Brains said he wanted to go to university and study medicine. After just 2 weeks, Baby Brains began working as a doctor at the local hospital. He was very popular with all the staff and patients. Word soon spread about the extraordinary Baby Brains. Everyone wanted to meet him. One night, some space scientists phoned. They asked if Baby Brains would like to help with their next space mission. The following day, Mr. and Mrs. Brains and their baby traveled out to the Space Center after training hard over the weekend. Baby Brains waved goodbye to Mr. and Mrs. Brains and blasted off into outer space. Everyone in the world held their breath as they watched Baby Brains take his first spacewalk. Tell us how you feel on the special occasion, radioed ground control. Baby Brains looked up at the vast starlit sky above him. He looked down at the vast starlit sky below him. He looked at the whole world in front of him and mumbled something. We can't quite hear you, radioed ground control. Could you repeat that? I want my mummy, wailed Baby Brains. That's enough, Mrs. Brains yelled to the space controller. Bring my baby home right now. Baby Brains was flown home as quickly as possible. He felt very embarrassed as he stepped down from the hatch. But through the crowd of photographers and cameramen, Mrs. Brains came running. Oh, beautiful little baby, sighed Mrs. Brains as she lifted him high into the air. Our brave little baby, said Mr. Brains. Can we go home? Said Baby Brains. At home, Mrs. Brains gave Baby Brains a warm bath, which made him feel a lot better. Mr. Brains tickled him, which made him laugh. And Mrs. Brains sang Baby Brains to sleep, and they gently laid him down in the brand new cot. It was good to have their baby home again. Our very own Baby Brains, whispered Mrs. Brains. And then from that day on, Baby Brains spent most of his time at home doing the things most babies do, except that is on weekends. when he still liked to help out at the hospital. I hope you enjoyed that story, Baby Brains. All right, we're going to continue on with James and the Giant Peach. We found out about James and that he's living with his Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, who are not very nice. And this seems to be a common thing with Roald Dahl stories. There's always some horrible people. We last lockdown, we did the Twits. And we heard about Mr. and Mrs. Twit, and they were very unlikable people with a fantastic Mr. Fox. There was Bogus, Bunce, and Bean. And so now we've got these two, Sponge and Spiker. But something peculiar is about to happen. So let's find out what that is. Chapter 3. It was at this point that the first thing of all, the rather peculiar thing that led to so many other much more peculiar things, happened to him. For suddenly, just behind him, James heard a rustling of leaves, and he turned round and saw an old man in a funny dark green suit emerging from the bushes. He was a very small old man, but he had a huge bald head and a face that was covered all over with bristly black whiskers. He stopped when he was about 3 yards away, and he stood there leaning on his stick and staring hard at James. When he spoke, his voice was very slow and creaky. "Come closer to me, little boy," he said, beckoning to James with a finger. "Come right up close to me and I will show you something wonderful." James was too frightened to move. The old man hobbled a step or two nearer, and then he put a hand into his pocket of his jacket and took out a small white paper bag. "You see this?" he whispered, waving the bag gently to and fro in front of James's face. "You know what this is, my dear? You know what's inside this little bag?" Then he came nearer still, leaning forward and pushing his face so close to James that James could feel breath blowing on his cheeks. The breath smelled musty and stale and slightly mildewed, like air in an old cellar. "Take a look, my dear," he said, opening the bag and tilting it towards James. Inside it, James could see a mass of tiny green things that looked like little stones or crystals, each one about the size of a grain of rice. They were extraordinarily beautiful, and there was a strange brightness about them, a sort of luminous quality that made them glow and sparkle in the most wonderful way. "Listen to them," the old man whispered. "Listen to them." James stared into the bag, and sure enough, there was a faint rustling sound coming from inside it, and he noticed that all the thousands of little green things were slowly, very, very slowly stirring about and moving over each other as though they were alive. "There's more power and magic in these things in there than in all of the rest of the world put together," the old man said softly. But what are they?" James murmured, finding his voice at last. Where did they come from?" "Aha," the old man whispered. "You'd never guess that." He was crouching a little now and pushing his face still closer and closer to James until the tip of his long nose was actually touching the skin on James's forehead. Then suddenly he jumped back and began waving his stick madly in the air. "Crocodile tongues!" he cried. 1,000 long slimy crocodile tongues boiled up in the skull of a dead witch for 20 days and nights with the eyeballs of a lizard. Add the fingers of a young monkey, a gizzard of a pig, a beak of a green parrot, the juice of a porcupine, 3 spoonfuls of sugar, stew for another week, and then let the moon do the rest. And all at once, he pushed the white paper bag into James's hands and said, "Here, you take it. It's yours." Chapter 4. Now, one thing that we should really say is that when strange people come up to you, it's probably best to go and find an adult, and especially if they're trying to hand things over to you. So this is only a story, but remember that if that happens, if someone comes up to you that you don't know, you make sure that you find an adult or someone that you know. All right, chapter 4. James Henry Trotter stood there clutching the bag and staring at the old man. "And now," the old man said, "all you've got to do is this. Take a large jug of water and pour all the little green things into it. Then very slowly, one by one, add 10 hairs from your own head. That sets them off. It gets them going. In a couple of minutes, the water will begin to froth and bubble furiously. As soon as that happens, you must drink it all down, the whole jug full in one gulp. And then, my dear, you'll feel it churning and boiling in your stomach, and steam will start coming out of your mouth. And immediately after that, marvelous things will start to happen to you. Fabulous, unbelievable things. And you will never be miserable again in your life. Because you are miserable, aren't you? You needn't tell me. I know all about it. Now off you go, do exactly as I say, and don't whisper a word of this to those two horrible aunts of yours. Not a word. And don't let those green things in there get away from me, you either. Because if they do escape, they'll be working their magic upon somebody else instead of upon you. And that isn't what you want at all, is it? My dear, whoever they meet first, be it bug, insect, animal, or tree, well, that will be the one who gets the full power of the magic. So hold tight to the bag. Don't tear the paper. Off you go. Now hurry up. Don't wait. Now's the time. Hurry. With that, the old man turned away and disappeared into the bushes. Chapter 5. The next moment, James was running back towards the house as fast as he could go. He would do it all in the kitchen, he told himself, if only he could get in there without Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker seeing him. He was terribly excited. He flew through the long grass and the stinging nettles, not caring whether he got stung or not on his bare knees. And in the distance, he could see Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker sitting in their chairs with their backs towards him. He swerved away from them so as to go around the other side of the house. But then suddenly, just as he was passing underneath the old peach tree that stood in the middle of the garden, his foot slipped and he fell flat on his face in the grass. The paper bag burst open as it hit the ground, and the thousands of tiny green things scattered in all directions. James immediately picked himself up on his hands and knees and started searching around for his precious treasures. But what was this? They were all sinking into the soil. He could actually see them wriggling and twisting as they burrowed their way downward into the hard earth. And at once, he reached out his hand to pick some of them up before it was too late, but they disappeared right under his fingers. He went after some others, and the same thing happened. He began scrabbling around frantically in an effort to catch hold of those that were left, but they were too quick for him. Each time, the tips of his fingers were just about to touch them, and they vanished into the earth. And soon, in the space of only a few seconds, every single one of them had gone. James felt like crying. They were lost forever. He would never get them back. But where had they gone to? And why in the world had they been so eager to push down into the earth like that? What were they after? There was nothing down there, nothing except the roots of an old peach tree and a whole lot of earthworms and centipedes and insects living in the soil. But what was it the old man had said? Whoever they meet first, be it bug, insect, animal, or tree, what will be the one? That will be the one that gets the full power of their magic. Good heavens, thought James, what is going to happen in the case it meets an earthworm or a centipede or a spider? And what if they go into the roots of a peach tree? Get him at once, you lazy little beast, a voice was shouting in James's ear. James glanced up and saw Aunt Spiker standing over him, grim and tall and bony, glaring at him through her steel-rimmed spectacles. Get back over there immediately and finish chopping up those logs, she ordered. Aunt Sponge, fat and pulpy as a jellyfish, came waddling up behind her sister to see what was going on. Why don't we just lower the boy into the well in the bucket and leave him there for the night, she suggested. That ought to teach him not to laze around like this the whole day long. That's a very good wheeze, my dear Sponge, but let's make him finish chopping up the wood first. Be off with you, you hideous little brat, and do some work. Slowly, sadly, poor James got up off the ground and went back to the woodpile. Oh, if he had only hadn't slipped and fallen and dropped that precious bag, all hope of a happier life had gone completely now. Today and tomorrow and the next day and all the other days as well would be nothing but punishment and pain, unhappiness and despair. He picked up the wood chopper and was about to start chopping it away again when he heard a shout behind him that made him stop and turn. I'll just share the first bit of chapter 6. Sponge, come here at once. Look at this. At what? It's a peach, Aunt Spiker was shouting. A what? Said Aunt Sponge. All right, we're going to finish it there and we will carry on and find out what is going to happen next. We have a new story for tomorrow. We're going to be reading this book here, which is called We Don't Eat Our Classmates. So we'll be sharing that tomorrow, as well as reading more of James and the Giant Peach. I hope you're all keeping safe. Look after yourselves. Remember, kids, be kind to your mums and dads and all the people who are at home. And we'll catch up with you tomorrow at 10 a.m. for another Tawa School Story Time. All right, ka kite anō.